Guys, so I apologize this video being a day late. Tell you what happened this weekend. And I wasn't quite myself yesterday and quite coherent because of what happened this weekend. I attempted a 100K on Saturday, and it is probably one of the toughest courses. I don't know. It's up there, one of the toughest courses in the U.S. And I ended up only making it 38 miles because it was very hot, and I ended up with some severe heat exhaustion and dehydration, and so up until yesterday I was still kind of recovering from that, and so I didn't get around to making a video. And besides that, I am been accepted to graduate school, and so I'm applying for financial aid, trying to get everything in order before we go start school in 3 weeks. So anyway, that's what's going on in my life, and I decided to answer this question today because I think it's relevant to about everybody with an eating disorder. That in the beginning, before you reach out for help, your eating disorder is usually very private. That's one of the premises of an eating disorder, is that we have this secret thing that nobody knows about, and we kind of protect that. And there are people that may have an eating disorder for years, and their family and friends may have no idea because they hide it so well. But as a result, we tend to isolate ourselves, and the longer we're in it, the more we try to the more we end up isolating ourselves, because the more energy and tension our eating disorder takes, and the more protective we become of it. So it's a legitimate question to ask: how do we get out of this rut of not wanting anybody to know? I can tell you my story. When I'm very, very open about my eating disorder now. In fact, I've done public speaking on the subject, and I've presented at different conferences, but in the beginning I wasn't. In fact, I was extremely frightened of anybody finding out. I was with a therapist who I am not with anymore because he was actually detrimental to my eating disorder. But in the beginning, when I had a complete, absolute relapse, I had had pretty severe eating disorder as a teenager, and my parents had found out about it. I ended up with some even more terrible therapy. It was completely unethical and abusive, and and then I acted like I recovered. I think I convinced myself that I had recovered, but I went through periods of where I would eat pretty normal, and then I would go through periods where I would probably consider myself orthorexic, where I had certain things I would eat and wouldn't eat. I gained weight with my children. I lost weight with my children. I gained weight and lost weight a lot. I went through periods where I was compulsively exercising but didn't think that it was a problem. And then I went through periods where I was also taking diet pills, an extreme amount of diet pills, and I didn't see that as a problem either. So, I was eating disordered in my head because I went a lot of years without purging or restricting per se, and then I had a complete relapse where I was completely restricting, purging all the time, and it just got worse and worse. And the therapist that I had at the time, I don't think he realized how severe it was, and he kind of just belittled and minimized the problem and made me feel like I was stupid for having it, instead of helping me. So in the beginning, I was really embarrassed because I felt like it was my fault. I felt like I should know better, and I didn't tell anybody. I was very secretive about it, but it changed my personality to the point where it was affecting my ability to have a relationship with my children, my husband. I was ornery all the time. I even to the point where I became suicidal because I was so into my eating disorder and not receiving any support that I felt like it was hopeless, and I began to feel like there was no hope of recovery, that I was just this way, and it was a miserable life. And I don't think I even realized at the time how miserable it was, because at the same time it was a comfort and it was a survival mechanism. And what you have to realize is that when you're in survival mode, you're doing what you're doing to survive. So whether that's an eating disorder, whether that's self-injury, a lot of times drug or alcohol addictions are the same things. We're doing it for whatever reason, whether it's trauma, whether it's we're just overwhelmed. A lot of times we get into that because it's our survival mechanism. And to have that threatened is like saying, if somebody says, well, just stop it, what they're saying is, well, just stop surviving. You can't just stop surviving. You have to find other ways to replace, or, I don't know, replace is the word, but find other coping mechanisms to survive. And that's not going to happen right away. And so it may be that you could say, well, I'm purging 5 times a day. Maybe I can substitute one of those times where I'm doing something different that's not eating disorder related. And you start to, and that sounds silly, but it works, and you start to find other ways to slowly cope with things and other ways to survive without completely feeling like, okay, all my survival mechanisms have been taken away from me. And I think that is part of the fear, and why we keep it so private, is that if we make it not private, people are going to tell us not to survive. And so if you look at it that way, and go into it with that knowledge, and you may have to educate the people that you find for support, or be very careful at first about who you go to for support. So it's really hard to make that first step in figuring out who to talk to. If you have the option of a therapist who's experienced with eating disorders, or a physician, or somebody who has experience with that, that would be my first recommendation, because they understand the eating disorder. They're not going to come in and just say, okay, you have to quit this right now. They're going to work with you in baby steps. That was one of my biggest fears with treatment, was that all of a sudden I was going to be exposed and naked, and it didn't turn out that way, because I worked with a therapist and a dietitian who understood eating disorders, and challenged it in little tiny bits, but didn't expect that my eating disorder was just going to go away, or that I was going to replace all my behaviors overnight with other things. It was a long process of, well, let's see how we can challenge it this week. Okay, you're purging this many times a day. 1 or 2 of those times, let's try doing something else. Instead of getting mad at yourself and saying you're a failure every time you purge. It's a learning process. So whether that's binging or restricting, whatever it is, whatever your behaviors are, that's a good place to start. Other options are to find friends or family members who may be supportive. Before I even switched therapist, for one, I did tell my husband eventually, but it created a lot of conflict, because he was worried about me, and when you tell somebody about your eating disorder and they're worried, sometimes that becomes the whole focus of the relationship and the conversation, and so you retreat even more, and they become more worried, and it puts a wedge in between things. So it's important to help the person understand that, this is something I'm working on, but it's not something that you can fix, and I need your support, but I don't need you being the food police. I don't need you 24 hours a day. I need you to be supportive, and when I need to call somebody or talk to somebody, I need you to be there for me and just to listen. They aren't professionals, and they need to understand that they will make things worse by trying to force you into recovery, by strong-arming you, or by making you feel guilty, or by trying to force you to eat, or by trying to lock up food, or whatever it is. They can't control your behaviors. They can't come in and rescue you. So that's important to help them to understand. Second, it took me a long time to do this, but I found friends that I could talk to, and it was scary to take that first step to talk to people, but the reaction wasn't as bad as I thought they would be. I thought they would think I was a failure. Instead, it became a very supportive, and it was a good thing for me, and that's what led me to be able to become more open. So, start with those steps, and good luck. That's a really hard thing, but start is, do what you can, small steps.